I found out my sister had slapped me at her wedding in front of 200 people, all because I wouldn't give her my penthouse. The consequences were brutal. Hey there, welcome to today's story. What are you up to right now? Whatever you're doing, get comfortable and get ready for a story that might just hit home. Today's story is about a character who finds themselves in a difficult family situation, facing choices that none of us would want to make. Have you ever been in a similar situation? Or maybe you've experienced something that made you question your worth. Stick with me until the end to see how the character navigates through all the chaos and comes out stronger. Also, before we jump into it, I'd love to ask for your support. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'm aiming for 1,000 subscribers, and your support would mean the world to me. That would give me the motivation to keep bringing you more amazing stories. Thanks so much for being here. I'm excited to share this one with you.
Hey everyone, I've been wanting to share this story for a while now. It's one of those family moments that sticks with you, but in the end, I think it's worth telling, mostly because of how everything turned out. So buckle up, this might get a little messy. A little about me before I dive in. I'm 32, single, and I've spent the last decade building my career in law. It wasn't easy. Long nights, tons of studying, endless hours at a corporate law firm, then starting my own practice from scratch. I'm no trust fund baby. Everything I have, I've worked for. But that's what makes this story a little more complicated, because my family never really saw it that way. Growing up, I was the one always working behind the scenes, doing everything I could to carve my own path. My sister, Sarah, on the other hand, was the golden child. She had everything handed to her. Charisma? Check. Looks? You bet. People just liked her, and she made sure everyone knew it. While I was slogging through law school, doing multiple internships just to pay rent, she was off traveling, dating a new guy every few months, and somehow always getting the attention. Our parents, of course, adored her. She was always finding herself, while I was stuck being the responsible one, always pushing myself harder and harder just to earn their approval. Fast forward to 5 years ago. I finally did something that felt like an actual win. I bought my own place, a penthouse in the city. It wasn't just a fancy apartment, it was a symbol of everything I had sacrificed for. The late nights, the hustle, the people who didn't think I'd make it. It was mine. Every square inch of that place was a reflection of my effort, and trust me, it felt like I earned every bit of it. The moment I moved in, I remember looking out of the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sunset over the skyline, and thinking, I finally made it. There was no more struggling for rent, no more splitting a tiny apartment with roommates who didn't clean up after themselves, no more worrying about how I was going to make ends meet. I was proud of what I'd accomplished. This condo wasn't just about real estate, it was about me. It was my victory. I didn't throw a party or brag about it. It wasn't my style. I just enjoyed my space, my peace, and my independence. But then, as always happens, my family came knocking. It all started one day when Sarah got engaged. James, her fiancé, was this guy she met just a few months ago, a tech entrepreneur who looked like he had it all together, but I wasn't so sure about his intentions. To be honest, I didn't expect their relationship to last, but somehow they decided to throw a big wedding, like a huge wedding, Ritz-Carlton, the works. The funny thing was, while they were throwing all this money around for their wedding, I could tell something wasn't adding up. James seemed way too eager to impress people, and Sarah, well, she was looking at this as her opportunity to settle down with a man who could provide for her. At 28, she still hadn't quite figured out what she wanted in life, except for the luxury life that had always been just out of reach. And me? I was sitting in my penthouse, watching the drama unfold from afar. I didn't think much of it at first. I was busy with my practice, working hard to keep things running. But then, my parents decided it was time for a family conversation. And that's when things started to go sideways. You see, my mom and dad were always a little self-serving, to put it lightly. They never understood the grind I went through, the sacrifices I made to get where I was. And suddenly, they weren't calling me up to talk about how proud they were of me. No, they were calling me to talk about Sarah and her wedding. Vivian, Mom said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness. Sarah and James are going to need a home. You know, they're starting a family soon, and your apartment would be perfect for them. I didn't even know what to say at first. I just blinked at her. My parents had never once asked me about my success. But now, suddenly, they wanted me to give up the very thing I'd worked my entire life for, my home? Dad chimed in, his voice harsh, as if this was somehow reasonable. I tried to stay calm. I'm not giving up my home for them, I replied, slowly, trying to wrap my head around what they were even asking. I worked hard for this. This is mine. But that didn't stop them. Well, you're single. You don't need all that space. Sarah's kids will need a real home, Dad continued, practically dismissing me and everything I'd achieved. It didn't make any sense. They wanted me to give up my penthouse, my sanctuary, for them, for a family that had never once supported me. At that moment, the room felt suffocating. My parents, sitting there as though their demands were perfectly reasonable, were oblivious to how I have completely overlooked everything I'd worked for. The tone was casual, as if they were talking about the weather. The cold reality of it all hit me like a wave, and for the first time, I could see it clearly. They didn't see me. They didn't care about my sacrifices, my late nights, or the way I had built my life from scratch. To them, I was just a tool to fulfill their needs, something to be used when convenient, discarded when no longer useful. Sarah had always been their pride and joy, the one who got by on charm and beauty alone. I could hear her voice in the back of my mind, her sneering comment about me being too serious or boring when we were younger. The way they always catered to her whims, while I was left to handle things on my own. This wasn't about family anymore. This was about their expectation of me to give up something I had worked so hard to achieve, just so Sarah could play the role of the perfect wife to her new husband. I stared down at the glass of champagne in my hand, suddenly aware of how tightly my grip had become. My parents were pleading now, almost bargaining with me. "Vivian, you don't need all that space," my mom continued. "Sarah and James, they're about to start a family. They'll need the room for kids. It's the right thing to do." The words hung in the air like a thick cloud, suffocating any hope of reason. The right thing to do, I thought? Was I selfish for wanting to keep what I'd earned? Was it wrong to expect to keep something I'd sacrificed so much for? I couldn't wrap my head around it. It was like they saw me as some sort of afterthought, something to be sacrificed for their vision of what family should look like. The entire conversation felt absurd, like a bad joke. "Trade your penthouse for James' studio in Queens," my dad added. "It's enough for one person. It's perfectly adequate." I could feel the disbelief creeping into my bones. They wanted me to trade my 3-bedroom apartment in the heart of the city for a cramped, outdated studio in an area I'd never even considered living in. Queens. It was as if they didn't understand that this wasn't just a place to live for me. It was a symbol of everything I had accomplished, everything I had fought for. And Sarah, she had the audacity to sit there, arms crossed, acting like I was being unreasonable. Her eyes flickered with that cold, calculated look she often wore when she knew she was getting exactly what she wanted. "Vivian, just think about it," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "I'm starting a family. I'll need that penthouse to raise my children in." I couldn't believe it. She was married for 8 months, and now suddenly she was ready to have kids? It was almost laughable if it weren't so infuriating. And what made it worse was the way they just assumed I would hand it over, no questions asked. I could feel my pulse rising, the tightness in my chest growing as the conversation continued. They didn't care that I had worked overtime, burned the midnight oil, and sacrificed personal relationships just to get to where I was. None of that mattered. It was all about what they needed, what Sarah wanted. And once again, I was being pushed aside. It was as if my success, my hard work, was just a means to an end, a tool to help them fulfill their image of the perfect family. I stood up abruptly, not wanting to hear any more of their ridiculous demands. "No," I said, my voice firmer than I'd ever spoken to them before. "I'm not giving up my home for Sarah. I earned this, and you can't just take it from me." The words felt like a weight lifted off my chest, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. They wouldn't let it go. They would push harder, as they always did, until they got what they wanted. It was in that moment that I realized something important. This wasn't about the apartment. It was never about the space or the future home for Sarah's hypothetical children. This was about control. They wanted to control me, to make me feel small, to keep me in my place. It was about teaching me a lesson that no matter how successful I became, I would always be their little girl who could be dismissed and taken for granted. And Sarah, of course, had no intentions of backing down. Her eyes narrowed as she leaned in, her voice cold. "You've always been jealous of me, haven't you?" she sneered. "You can't stand that I'm getting everything I want while you're stuck with nothing but your career." That was the final straw. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Her entire life had been about taking, and now she was trying to take what was mine. But I wasn't going to let her. I turned away from them, walking toward the exit, feeling the weight of their stares follow me. The laughter in the room felt like it was vibrating through my bones. Sarah's friends were smirking, her fiancé's colleagues chuckling under their breath. I could hear whispers behind me, muttered comments about me being too serious, uptight, and selfish. But none of it mattered. I wasn't the one who was going to be humiliated today. They were. In that moment, something clicked inside me. I had always been the responsible one, the one who did everything right, who played by the rules. But no one had ever respected me for it. They took my hard work for granted. And today, I was going to change that. I was done playing by their rules. This was my time. I walked out of that room, my head held high. But I wasn't done yet. This wasn't just about standing my ground. I wasn't going to leave without a mark they would never forget. In that moment, something clicked inside me. I had always been the responsible one, the one who did everything right, who played by the rules. But no one had ever respected me for it. They took my hard work for granted. And today, I was going to change that. I was done playing by their rules. This was my time. I walked out of that room, my head held high. But I wasn't done yet. This wasn't just about standing my ground. I wasn't going to leave without a mark they would never forget. As I made my way out of ballroom, I could hear the murmurs getting louder. The guests, who had been watching the family drama unfold, were buzzing with excitement. They'd never expected this. They thought I'd break down or beg for forgiveness or simply disappear into the background, as I always had. But not this time. This time, I was done playing the role of the quiet, obedient daughter. I didn't say a word as I left the venue. I didn't bother with pleasantries or fake smiles. I had to get away from them, to think, to process everything that had just happened. But as I stepped into the cool night air, something inside me shifted. I couldn't let this go. Not now. Not after everything they had done to me. I had been their punching bag for too long, and now it was time to make them feel the weight of their actions. I pulled out my phone and opened my messages. My mind raced as I typed, each word more deliberate than the last. I wasn't going to cry about this. I wasn't going to hide in shame. Instead, I started typing a message to my closest contacts, the people who knew me, respected me, and had seen me rise from nothing. I wasn't going to keep this private. No, they needed to know what had just happened, how I had been humiliated in front of 200 people by my own family. I hit send, and just like that, the bombshell was out. The text I sent wasn't just a simple update, it was a well-crafted recount of the evening, detailing the way my family had demanded I give up my home, how they had treated me like an object, and how my sister had slapped me in front of everyone. I made sure to mention how everyone had laughed, how they thought it was funny. It wasn't just a slap, it was an assault, and I wasn't going to let it slide. The seconds ticked by, but it felt like hours. I had no idea how quickly this would blow up, but I wasn't backing down. The family might think they had won, but I knew the game wasn't over. By the time I got back to my apartment, the messages were already flooding in. My phone buzzed relentlessly, every notification lighting up the screen. I opened the first one, then the next, and another. My assistant, Jenna, was messaging me, asking if I was okay. She'd seen the post. And then the news outlets started reaching out. A couple of lawyers, some journalists who had heard about the incident. Everyone was talking about it. The story was spreading fast. But the real kicker came when my phone rang. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. The voice on the other end was unmistakable. Margaret Chen, a respected judge I had worked with in the past. I wasn't sure how she had gotten my number, but I wasn't about to ignore the call. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She went straight to the point. Vivian, I saw everything. I was there tonight. I want you to know that what your sister did, that was assault. I've seen it 1,000 times in court. Emotional abuse, financial abuse, and now physical. This is a textbook case. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had known it was bad, but hearing it from someone who had spent her entire career seeing cases like mine, hearing her confirm it, made everything feel different. This wasn't just a family squabble. This was something deeper, something more sinister, and I was finally starting to see it for what it really was. I thanked her for calling, though I didn't know exactly what to say. I was still processing everything. It was one thing to feel humiliated and disrespected by my family, but it was another to have someone in a position of power validate my experience like that. As I sat on my couch, the weight of the evening's events finally started to sink in. It wasn't just the slap. It wasn't even the cruel demands they had made. It was everything, the years of disregard, the constant manipulation, and the way they had always tried to control me. They had tried to break me down, to make me feel like I was nothing more than a tool for them. But tonight, I had fought back, and I was just getting started. The phone rang again, and this time it was one of the lawyers I worked with. He had heard the news and wanted to offer his support. It was a small thing, but it meant the world to me. Slowly, the tide began to turn. People were seeing me differently, and the people who had stood by me through the years were now showing their support more than ever. By the time the night ended, Sarah and my parents had already started to feel the fallout. My social media was blowing up, and so was theirs. I could see it happening in real time. The comments, the shares, the articles, the calls. My family's reputation was spiraling out of control, and I knew it was only the beginning. And that was the moment I realized. This wasn't just about getting back at them. It wasn't about proving I was right. This was about taking my power back, about refusing to let them use me anymore. It was about standing up for myself, finally, after years of feeling invisible in my own family. The next day, the press was full of it. The headline read, "Vivian Morrison, lawyer, assaulted at sister's wedding. A family scandal unfolds." My family wasn't ready for what was coming next. They thought they could get away with it. They thought I'd just let it slide. But I wasn't backing down anymore. As the day wore on, I started getting messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. They were offering their support, expressing their shock, and even sharing their own experiences with family abuse. The world had just witnessed my family's dysfunction, and now they were all asking me one question: how does it feel to finally have your moment? And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was being judged for my success. I felt powerful. I felt like I had finally stepped into the person I was meant to be. I had fought back, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been pushed down by their own family, their own loved ones. I had taken control, and no one could ever take that from me. It didn't take long for the ripple effect for that night to become a full-blown storm. The media picked up the story faster than I could have imagined, and soon my family was facing a backlash they were completely unprepared for. Sarah, who had always prided herself on being the center of attention, suddenly found herself in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. She was no longer the golden girl in our family's eyes. The girl who always got what she wanted was now a symbol of entitlement, selfishness, and physical violence. I spent the next few days in a blur of calls, messages, and articles. My phone didn't stop buzzing. People I hadn't heard from in years, friends, colleagues, even some acquaintances from past cases reached out to express their shock, their support, and their disbelief. I was flooded with messages from people who'd seen the video of the slap, who shared their outrage at what had happened. They didn't just sympathize with me, they admired me for standing up for myself, for refusing to stay silent, and for using my voice in a way I never had before. But for Sarah and my parents, it was a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. The day after the wedding, I received a message from a reporter I had worked with in the past. He asked me for a statement, but I wasn't ready to talk yet. I wasn't sure what to say. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone anymore. The truth had already spoken for me. And then came the fallout. Sarah was fired from her PR agency. The same people who had once seen her as a rising star were now distancing themselves from her. Word spread, and her social media, once filled with perfect pictures and posed smiles, became a place of scorn and ridicule. People were no longer congratulating her on her wedding. They were condemning her for her actions. Her carefully crafted image as the perfect bride was shattered beyond repair. As for my parents, their social standing was beginning to erode. Invitations to events they'd once been a part of were rescinded. My dad's business, which had always relied on the favor of people in high society, began to feel the pressure. Clients started to distance themselves. The phone calls that once came with ease now became more and more difficult to answer. People weren't looking at them with the same respect they once did. Instead, they saw them as part of the problem. They were the ones who had stood by and watched their daughter be humiliated. They were the ones who had done nothing to stop it. For the first time in my life, I was in control. It wasn't about making them pay for what they'd done. It wasn't about getting back at them for the years of being sidelined and overlooked. It was about reclaiming my voice. I had spent my entire life letting them define me, letting them dictate what I was worth, but not anymore. I had finally taken ownership of my narrative. And the most satisfying part? They had no idea how to handle it. They couldn't even apologize without making things worse. My mom tried to call me multiple times in the days that followed, but I didn't answer. Every time I saw her name pop up on my phone, my stomach churned. She didn't deserve my time, not after everything she had said to me, after the way she had stood behind Sarah, silently encouraging her behavior. It was almost laughable. They wanted me to feel guilty for standing up for myself. They wanted me to apologize for not being the doormat they had always expected me to be. But I wasn't going to be that person anymore. I wasn't going to bend to their expectations. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative. It was then that I realized just how much I had underestimated myself. For years, I had lived under the shadow of their judgments, their insults, and their demands. I had let their words define my worth. But now, I could finally see clearly. My family wasn't the perfect unit I had once believed it to be. They were a collection of people who took and never gave back. They never celebrated my wins. They never supported me when I needed them most. But now, with every message of support, every shared post, every article that painted me as the victim of a family that took me for granted, I could finally see who I really was. I wasn't the girl who had to prove herself anymore. I wasn't the person they could manipulate. I was Vivian Morrison, the woman who had fought her way to the top, and I wasn't going to apologize for it. Sarah, in particular, seemed to spiral the most. She couldn't handle the backlash. The perfection she had carefully cultivated for years was cracking at the seams. She was no longer the center of attention, and that was a blow she couldn't recover from. She was trying to control the damage, but the harder she tried, the worse things got. It wasn't just her career at stake anymore. It was her entire identity. And me? I was getting stronger every day. I realized that no matter how much they tried to tear me down, no matter how much they tried to make me feel small, I had already won. I had stood up for myself in a way I never thought possible, and now I was finally free. The strangest part of it all was that I didn't even feel anger anymore. The anger that had been building up for years, the resentment, it all started to melt away. I had achieved something far more powerful. I had set boundaries. I had finally made my peace with the fact that my family might never understand me, might never appreciate what I've done, and that was okay. For once, I wasn't worried about what they thought of me. I wasn't seeking their approval. I had something far more valuable now, self-respect, and that was enough. As the days passed, the consequences of my family's actions became more apparent. It wasn't just the media storm that had followed the incident at the wedding. It was the slow unraveling of everything they had worked to build, the perfect facade they had been maintaining for so long. The reactions from the public were swift, and more importantly, the reactions from people who mattered to me were overwhelming. Friends, colleagues, even old mentors reached out to offer their support and praise for standing my ground. But for Sarah and my parents, the silence was deafening. They had expected me to buckle under the pressure, to crawl back into their world with my tail between my legs, apologizing for standing up for myself. That was the pattern they were used to. They were used to me being the responsible one, the one who played by their rules, who never questioned their authority, who let them call the shots. This time, though, everything had changed. Sarah's world had come crashing down around her, and she wasn't handling it well. Her carefully constructed image as the beautiful, successful daughter had shattered. People who once adored her now viewed her with disdain. Her social media accounts, which had once been filled with perfect moments, were now flooded with comments of shock and disgust. No one could believe what they had witnessed, and in her efforts to salvage her reputation, she made mistake after mistake, trying to play the victim, trying to paint herself as misunderstood, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Meanwhile, my parents were no better. I could hear the whispers, see the glances when they entered social events, the way people turned their heads. They had been complicit. They had stood there and watched me be publicly humiliated, and instead of defending me, they allowed it to happen. For once, the roles were reversed. They were no longer the ones in control. The people they had relied on for validation were distancing themselves, and they couldn't stop it. I could almost hear their voices in my head, trying to justify their actions, trying to explain how it wasn't as bad as it seemed, how Sarah was just emotional. But it wasn't just about the slap, and it wasn't just about the penthouse. It was about everything that had led up to that moment. The years of manipulation, the constant belittling, the never-ending expectation that I should sacrifice my happiness for theirs. The slap had just been the breaking point, the final straw. But while they were reeling from the aftermath of their actions, I was finally beginning to feel the peace I had been craving for so long. It wasn't about revenge, though it certainly felt satisfying to watch their world crumble. It was about taking my power back. It was about reclaiming the narrative, finally deciding that I was no longer going to be their punching bag, their afterthought. I had let them define me for so long, and I was done with that. There was a sense of relief in knowing that I didn't have to chase their approval anymore. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how successful I became, it was never going to be enough for them. But now, I didn't need it. I was free of them. I was free of the constant weight of their expectations. I was free of their toxic love. And as I watched them scramble to repair their broken reputations, I couldn't help but feel a small smile creeping onto my face. They thought they had me cornered. They thought that by shaming me in front of everyone, by taking something I had worked so hard for, they would finally break me. But instead, it had done the opposite. My career flourished, clients reached out. My reputation, which had once been shaped by the shadows of my family's expectations, was now being built on my own merit. People saw me for who I truly was, not as the daughter they could control or the sister they could manipulate. They saw me as Vivian Morrison, the lawyer who had fought for herself, the woman who had turned her pain into power. Even though Sarah tried to apologize, tried to patch things up with me, I knew deep down that I could never go back to the person I was before that night. I could never pretend to be the obedient daughter they had always wanted. I couldn't go back to being invisible in my own family. I had made my peace with the fact that they might never change, and that was okay. The world had shifted, and for once, I was on the right side of it. As the months went by, the consequences continued to unfold. Sarah's marriage to James ended in divorce. The pressure of the public fallout, combined with the financial strain of losing their jobs, had torn them apart. She was left to pick up the pieces of a life she had never truly built for herself, a life that had been based on appearances rather than substance. And my parents? They never truly recovered from the scandal. They couldn't repair the damage they had done to me. I continued to rise, unshaken. The penthouse, which had been the center of all their demands, remained mine. I had earned it, and no one, not even my family, was going to take it from me. But what I found most satisfying was not the material success, not the satisfaction of seeing them face consequences. It was knowing that I had finally, truly stood up for myself. I had been fighting for so long, not just for success, but for my right to exist on my own terms. And in the end, that was all I ever needed. I no longer looked back at my family with longing or regret. They had shown me who they really were. And as for me, I was finally free. As the dust settled and I continued to move forward with my life, something unexpected happened. I had always expected that after the dust cleared, things would fall into a sort of normal. I imagined my family would eventually retreat into their own corners, licking their wounds, and I would go on building my career, finally free from the toxic entanglements of our past. But that's not what happened. What happened was something I didn't anticipate. Sarah came back. Months passed and life seemed to regain its rhythm. I had kept my distance from everyone, focused on my practice, and allowed myself to enjoy the success I had worked so tirelessly for. But then, one late evening, as I sat at my desk, my phone buzzed with a text. I didn't recognize the number. The message was short, almost abrupt. "Please, Vivian, can we talk?" It didn't take me long to realize who it was. The message was from Sarah. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her fall further into the mess she had created. But there was something that gnawed at me, something that made me hesitate. I knew I didn't owe her anything. She had slapped me in front of 200 people, humiliated me, and then turned the entire incident into a public spectacle. And yet, in the months since, it had been a strange mix of relief and unease, the sense that I had never truly gotten closure on what had happened. The small part of me that still craved the approval of my family, the part that had been buried for years, stirred. So I replied. We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown. As I walked in, I saw her sitting at a corner table, her eyes red from what I assumed were tears. Her once carefully maintained appearance now a little more disheveled, like a person who had been through more than just a few tough months. There was a nervous energy about her as I approached. She looked up, and for a second, I could see the sister I once knew, the girl who could charm her way out of anything, the girl who had always seemed untouchable. But now, she wasn't that girl anymore. She wasn't the girl I had spent my life trying to get away from either. She was a broken version of that person, a woman who had lost everything, her marriage, her job, her reputation, and was now facing the consequences of her own entitlement. And I couldn't decide if I felt pity for her or if I was simply tired of it all. We sat in silence for a while. I let her speak first. Her words were jumbled, rushed, as if she had been rehearsing them for days, or maybe longer. But there was a desperation in her voice that I hadn't heard before. She was begging me for something I wasn't sure I could give. "I'm sorry," she said, finally, after a long silence. "I never meant for it to go this far. I was just angry, and I wanted what I thought was mine. I didn't realize how much I hurt you until it was too late." I listened, but I wasn't sure I could believe her. Did she really understand? Did she truly get what she had done? I wasn't sure, but I wasn't interested in her apology anymore. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the truth was, I had already moved on. But it wasn't her apology I needed. It was the closure. It was the peace that I had been seeking for so long. Peace that came not from forgiveness, but from the realization that I didn't need her approval anymore. I didn't need anyone to tell me I had done the right thing. The conversation continued, but it felt distant now. She apologized again and again, but every word sounded like an echo from the past, a familiar tune that had played in our family for years. She had never apologized before, not in the way that truly mattered. And now her apology felt like a final grasp at something she had already lost, a family, a reputation, an image of herself that was no longer possible to maintain. I didn't give her what she wanted. I didn't tell her I forgave her. Instead, I told her the truth. You can't just fix everything with an apology. Sometimes the damage is too deep to repair, and that's something you'll have to live with. Her face fell, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes that was more than just the bitterness of someone who had been caught in a lie. It was something deeper, something raw and real. She was finally seeing the consequences of her actions, and I was no longer the one who had to bear the weight of her mistakes. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. I had spent so many years trying to make sense of her actions, trying to get her to see me, to value me. But I didn't need that anymore. I had learned the most important lesson of all. I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval, their love, their validation. All I needed was to stand firm in who I was. And that was enough. As I walked out of that cafe, I felt a strange sense of finality. It was like a door had closed, not just between Sarah and me, but between me and the past I had been carrying for so long. I was done. Done with the constant struggle for approval. Done with trying to make sense of a family that had never understood me. Done with pretending I could be something I wasn't just to please them. I was free.
As I walked away from the cafe, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. This wasn't just about a family drama or a moment of revenge. It was about taking my life back, regaining control, and realizing that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let go. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I questioned whether I should have done things differently or if I should have tried harder to save the family bond that once meant so much to me. But in the end, I understood that true freedom comes not from keeping toxic relationships intact, but from cutting them loose. What do you think about this story? Did you see the twist coming? Or did you find yourself thinking about how you might handle a situation like this? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment with your reflections, feelings, or opinions. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories and stay tuned for the next chapter of this ongoing journey. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole story. It's been a wild ride.